Hello and welcome to the PHLY Eagles mock draft. Before we begin, make sure you're subscribed to the PHLY YouTube page where you'll find all our draft content. The PHLY Draft Show with Fran Duffy, Bo Wolf hosting that. Bo Wolf and I have our Eagles draft thoughts every day at 2 p.m., plus all of Fran's draft content. Make sure you're a diehard too on allphly.com, and you can read Fran Duffy's exclusive draft guide. It's mock draft time, and this is our post-free agency mock draft where we look at where the Eagles roster stands after free agency and how they will address the first 3 rounds of the draft. Now, I don't think the Eagles did anything in free agency that will affect them on draft day. The needs are, and the priority is still the offensive and defensive lines, and that's where we will look in the first round, where the Eagles will go with Walter Nolen, the defensive tackle from Ole Miss. Walter Nolen, who Fran Duffy has ranked as the number 2 defensive tackle, number 18 on his big board. He's 6'3.5", 296 pounds, not especially long-armed, but he was an outstanding player. Consensus All-American at Ole Miss, transferred from Texas A&M. If you follow recruiting, you know Walter Nolen. He was once one of the top-ranked players in the country, either number 1 or number 2, him or Travis Hunter. Backed it up in college, especially this past year at Ole Miss, left after 3 years. So this isn't as much about need as it is organizational priority and the quality of the player. When you watch Walter Nolen, what jumps out is the explosiveness, the violence with which he plays with. The athletic ability's there. The strength is there. There's so much to work with here. It would not surprise me if he's one of the best players in this draft when all is said and done. If you told me going into draft season they would end up with Walter Nolen in the first round, I would say that's a huge win for the Eagles. They obviously have Jalen Carter. He's the foundation piece on the Eagles' defensive line. Jordan Davis is entering into his 4th season. The Eagles are hoping for more from him. They have Moro Ojima stepping into a bigger role next season, but defensive tackles an organizational priority. It's a spot where the Eagles will always look, and with Walter Nolen, he's one of the elite players in this class. If he's there at 32, that will be an outstanding outcome for the Eagles. Now, one thing I'm trying to do with this mock draft is avoid the players that I've picked in previous mock drafts. I wrote one on allphly.com before the combine, and so I want to give you different names. In that mock draft, I had the Eagles taking Tennessee edge rusher James Pierce Jr. in the first round. I still think that would be a smart pick for the Eagles. Someone else who I considered here is Boston College's their edge rusher, Donovan Ezeruku. If he were to drop here to number 32, the South Jersey native would be a good pick for the Eagles. But in this mock draft we're doing today, I actually have the Eagles going with an edge rusher in the second round, and that's where we'll move here. With the Eagles' second-round pick, look for Nick Scorton from Texas A&M. Now, you might look at this and say Nick Scorton won't be there when the Eagles draft in the second round, and that very well might be the case. But he's expected to be a second-round type player. Not every edge rusher is going to go at the slot where you expect them. Someone is going to fall. Scorton is Fran's number 5 edge rusher, number 42 on the big board. So second-round range. And he's someone who I really want to highlight because of the edge rushers in the draft, he's an interesting player to watch. He intrigues me. He has 33-inch arms. He's a power player in that he was listed in the 280 range when he was in college, weighed in at the 250 range at the combine. He had 10 sacks at Purdue 2 years ago, transfers to Texas A&M, and doesn't have the same type of sack production, used a little differently. But what jumps out to me is the power that he plays with. He's versatile. He can play different techniques. He's played in the stand-up role. When he was at Purdue, he dropped in the coverage. That's not the way you want to feature him, but it's not foreign to him either. A matter of fact, I can see a little Brandon Graham in his game. That's high praise for someone, especially we saw Brandon Graham retire after 15 years, one of the great players in Eagles history. But in terms of the power that he plays with, the build that he has, he's not your tall, long-armed player, but your tall, long player. But what he is he's built well, and he has a physical game. He's someone who I would watch. 2 other edge rushers that I considered here in the second round, Landon Jackson from Arkansas, who's a tall, long player. If he's in that range, he's intriguing. He has traits that are hard to find. And then on the other end of the spectrum, Michigan's Josiah Stewart, a player I love to watch, doesn't have the physical size that you might look for, but you watch him play, you can see him in this Vic Fangio defense. In the first mock draft, I had the Eagles taking Cameron Williams, the offensive tackle, offensive guard from Texas. He's someone who I would pay attention to as well if the Eagles go O-line in this range. But I actually have the Eagles going offensive line in the third round in this mock draft, and that's where we will move next. We're going with Charles Grant, the offensive lineman from William and Mary. So not a big school player. He's Fran's 14th ranked tackle guard. He's 60th on Fran's big board. He's from a smaller school, but he was a standout at the FCS level. An All-American, 6'5", 311 pounds, and 34 and 3/4-inch arms. So that's longer than Cameron Williams. That's longer than Emory Jones. That's longer than Anthony Belton. Those are offensive linemen that we'd be talking about on day 2. He has the length that you're looking for. He was a 3-year starter at left tackle. Some projections have him playing guard at the next level. Guard or tackle, he's someone who the Eagles could develop. He didn't get to work out at the combine. I imagine his stock might be higher if he did. He's an athletic player. He was on Bruce Feldman from the Athletics freak list going into the college football season. That's reserved for players with rare physical attributes, and that's what you'll be seeing from Charles Grant. He's someone who Jeff Stoutland can develop. Jeff Stoutland's had success taking players who still have that development curve ahead of them and really building them, molding them into the player they can be. That's what jumps out to me about Charles Grant. He was a wrestler in high school. He's someone who might take time, might need some polish, but you have the offensive line coach who can do that. And the Eagles don't have that urge to have to start a player at tackle or start a player at guard next season. If you're looking for other potential offensive linemen, one player to watch, Boston College's Ozzy Trapillo. He's 6'8". He has experience on both the left side and the right side. A 3-year starter, was a player who was a big piece of that BC program. He's a different type of player than Charles Grant, but he's a player that I would watch for the Eagles as well. In the first mock draft, I had the Eagles going with tight end Mason Taylor at this spot. That's obviously a player I would watch. The Eagles should be looking for tight ends. This is a good tight end draft class. If Mason Taylor were to somehow fall to the third round, he would be the ideal pick for the Eagles as well. But I'm expecting, if all things to be equal, the Eagles to focus on the lines of scrimmage. Offensive line, defensive line. It might be boring, but that's how they draft. Howie Roseman has a long history of doing it. And in this mock draft, I expected the Eagles to emphasize both sides of the line of scrimmage. So to sum it up, first round, Walter Nolan, defensive tackle, Ole Miss, physical player, explosive. He has a chance to be one of the best players in this draft if everything comes together. Second round, Nick Scorton from Texas A&M, a physical edge rusher, different type of player than what the Eagles have on their roster already. Third round, Charles Grant, more of a project offensive lineman, but they have the offensive line coach to develop that project.